Hello. Hi, I'm Jonathan from Your Why, and this is Be Well. Thank you for joining us. As always, I'm honored to have the opportunity to bring together experts in the field about living mindfully. As your moderator, I come to you with 30 plus years of experience in mental health and in mindfulness. Mindfulness to me today is very relevant because we're talking about the brain and the mind and having that be vibrant as we age. So I'm really looking forward to our dialogue, our conversation. Our topic is keep your mind sharp. We have Dr. Michael Plopper with us today. He has expertise on brain health. He's the medical director of clinical trials through Sharp Mesa Vista Hospital. And in a moment, I'll give him an opportunity to share with you the wealth of background that has brought him to us today. As we look at the area of keeping our mind sharp and brain health, so to speak, we're aware that in our society currently there is a dramatic increase or prevalence of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So for all of us, as we age, we want to look at how best to keep our brain young, healthy, sharp, and vibrant. So today, we're going to have a wonderful conversation and looking at ways that we can participate and keep our mind sharp and be healthy in that way. So Dr. Plopper, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
I know we had to enter into being recorded. We were having a wonderful conversation about the research that you've been doing. And one of the things, if you would start, is just how you got to the point of where you are today speaking on this particular topic, because you have a wealth of background that brings you to us.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. Well, I've been a geriatric psychiatrist my whole career, which is lengthy. I trained at USC years ago, did a fellowship in geriatric psychiatry, and I've been taking care of seniors and mental health issues relative to seniors really for the past 30 plus years. And so I've been actively in practice in San Diego, as well as the chief medical officer of Sharp Behavioral Health Services over about 25 years. And that included Sharp Mesa Vista Hospital and its outpatient services, as well as our associated programs within Sharp Healthcare. So I've been active in administration as well as in research. And over these years, I've been doing clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease, as well as other issues in mental health. But specific to Alzheimer's disease, we have over the past 10 or 15 years done a number of studies throughout North America and throughout the world, and have yet to really find a cure. And so what we're really looking for is a medication or a group of medications which can halt the progression of Alzheimer's disease and perhaps even cure Alzheimer's disease. And that's really what we've been trying to do on our clinical trials at Sharp. We're currently doing a number of trials in Alzheimer's disease, and welcome any interest in anybody who wants to participate. Feel free to contact us and we can give that information at the end of the conversation. But today we're talking about how to keep your brain healthy, how to avoid the onset of dementia or cognitive changes in later life, things we can do throughout our lives which protect our brains and help us to function optimally in later life in terms of brain function. And so those are the types of things I'd like to talk about. And so fire away, Jonathan.
So yeah, and wonderful. What I'd love to do is if you could provide a context for as we age, what is like natural aging in what we would expect in terms of brain function, because some people look at forgetfulness and so they start to not be as sharp, and so they're thinking, no, is that dementia coming on? So if you could provide a context for what is the natural framework of how our brain will age that isn't of concern for disease per se, what can we expect?
We can expect, if we take good care of ourselves, our brains working perfectly fine throughout our lives. We, in very late life, we sometimes can develop some mild age-related cognitive changes, We're not quite as quick to process information sometimes. But a lot of that is made up for by what we call crystalline intelligence. So over time, we accumulate knowledge and we accumulate experiences which protect us to some extent and which help us to sort of overcome the changes that happen in our brains sort of naturally. For example, our highest creative powers are at about age 18. And from from then on, it's sort of a very slow decline in terms of our creativity, our capability of being creativity. Now, obviously, there are plenty of exceptions to that in terms of great artists who have remained creative throughout their lives and done some of their best work in later life. But in actual fact, in terms of our cognitive ability, it's our brains are most functional at about age 18 to 20. And then it starts to be a little slippage over time, but we remain completely capable of doing anything we were able to do then later in life if we do the kinds of things we need to do to keep our brain sharp throughout life. And
Michael,
so
I'm really disappointed there. I missed my window. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
there's that was your maximum capability, Jonathan, but that doesn't mean you still haven't got plenty of capability.
I appreciate that.
So as we age, our brains do change somewhat, but we remain fully functional in terms of brain capability throughout life, unless things get in the way. And the things that get in the way are disease processes of various types, which we can talk about, but also lifestyle, just how we have led our lives throughout those years in terms of what we ingest, in terms of what we do with ourselves physically, and in terms of our social selves. And if we really pay attention to those three general realms, we will age gracefully and our brains will function as well as they can well into late life.
So let's start with one of those, Michael. In terms
Okay.
of a diet, I mean, often you hear about different diets, and one is touted as better than another for brain function and aging. What does your research show in terms of a diet that really would lend itself to us aging gracefully and well with our mental capability?
Well, there are a couple of things that happen that diet affects in our body. One of which is called oxidative stress. And so there are just billions and billions of chemical reactions going on continuously in our brains and bodies that utilize oxygen as an energy source. And a consequence of all of those chemical reactions are little byproducts called free radicals. They're little charged particles that sort of accumulate as a side product of all of these chemical reactions. And over time, these free radicals can cause tissue damage, particularly in terms of our cellular membranes throughout our cells, throughout our bodies, and the membranes that allow substances into the cell and out of the cell. And those cell membranes remain more permeable if there are fewer free radical interactions at that site and throughout the body. And so we look for medication. So our body deals with that by reducing free radicals. Our body produces enzymes which attach to free radicals and remove them and sort of heal our tissues in an ongoing process. So our body produces those antioxidants, they're called. And then we also take in antioxidants in food. And so our body does part of the job, but then what we ingest does the rest of the job in terms of reducing oxidative stress on our bodies. And the types of foods which are most helpful in terms of antioxidants are those contained in a Mediterranean diet. And so that is leafy green vegetables. You want as much color as you can in your vegetables, if possible. Citrus, fish, fish oils, nuts. These are key components of a Mediterranean diet, which, if eaten regularly, will protect the brain. If a person eats a Mediterranean diet throughout their lives, there's no need for any sort of supplementation of other types of vitamins or other types of supplements, because you're getting plenty of antioxidation through your diet, through a Mediterranean diet.
So, Michael, when you talk about the citrus, I mean, I've heard a lot about berries, any kind of berries, as many berries as possible just to get those antioxidants.
Yes, they're well. They're the any type of berries are particularly are good. Blueberries in particular, strawberries really are heavily laden with antioxidants and really are sort of the best of the group. The so they contain a type of antioxidant called flavonoids. It's a type of antioxidant contained in these types of foods that does help the body. Now, a second component relative to how our diet affects us is relative to inflammation. And inflammation is as we heal, we get a wound and there's redness around the wound, but then there's redness in the general area of that wound. And that's sort of a generalized inflammation as tissue heals. You can sort of look at the rest of the body in that same way, in terms of when there are pathological processes that go on, our body can become inflamed, and that's inside of our vessels and our brain and everywhere else. And that inflammation is destructive in terms of tissue stability. And what you really want to do is eat foods which are anti-inflammatory, and not eat foods which are inflammatory. And there have been a number of studies which have been done looking at markers, biomarkers in the bloodstream that measure inflammation, and then comparing large studies of people and the types of diets they have, and then measuring these biomarkers relative to their types of diets. And we find that people who eat a lot of red meat, who eat a lot of processed meat, organ meats, are eating highly inflammatory foods. So the less red meat, the better. The less processed food, the better. And then in terms of anti-inflammatory foods, it again gets back to the same types of foods we talked about as being antioxidative. And those are the foods contained in a Mediterranean diet. Green leafy vegetables, fruit, fish, oils, olive oil in particular, obviously, nuts, some chicken, a little bit of red meat, but not very much. And that will keep your brain sharp, that diet, if you actually eat it.
Now, Dr. Plepper, you started as you were sharing about the Mediterranean diet, and you were sharing that people that have had practiced the Mediterranean diet throughout their life are in great shape. A lot of us haven't ascribed to it or ascribed to it later in life. So when we're talking about some of these things, the significance of when you adopt such a lifestyle, is there hope for some of us that may not have ascribed to this earlier?
Absolutely, there's hope. There are good studies that demonstrate that despite the fact that people who have had unhealthy diets for much of their life, and therefore have had some physical manifestations of that, for example, metabolic syndrome, let's say, someone who may have developed diabetes, and part as a consequence of their diet. So there's those types of things that can happen, which can improve if the diet is changed. But specific to your question, it's never too late to start with a healthy diet. You will improve your brain function and capabilities if you change to that type of diet later in life. But you still may have had some of those negative consequences physically of the diet, of a bad diet.
Can we not only slow down that progression of deterioration, so to speak, or pathology with the mental capability by adopting these, or can we even reverse some of those impacts?
We absolutely can slow them down. In terms of reversal, that remains to be seen. Now, there is a phenomenon in the brain called neurogenesis, which happens in the hippocampus. And there are certain types of the brain which actually can create new brain cells. For a long time, we thought that we only get so many brain cells and that's it. And then slowly we just gradually lose them. That's not entirely true. Now, that is true in certain parts of the brain, but in the part of the brain that's involved in memory, that is the hippocampus, there is a phenomenon called neurogenesis, which allows for new neurons, new brain cells to be developed in that area. And it's thought that in some people with Alzheimer's disease, it's dysfunction in that particular component of neurogenesis that is leading to their inability to a degeneration of that function. So, but anyway, go ahead.
Sorry. Is neurogenesis something that would naturally happen in terms of our body healing itself constantly and regenerating?
Yes, it's a natural phenomenon which is promoted by diet and by exercise, particularly by exercise. If we want to turn to that other major component of how we stay sharp, there's good evidence that almost any form of exercise will improve blood flow to the hippocampus and therefore help with the process of neurogenesis and new brain cells being formed in the hippocampus. But there's good evidence that different types of exercise, so strengthening is useful, aerobic exercise is useful, stretching is useful. The main issue is it needs to be reasonably regular, does not have to be the most intense workouts you can possibly imagine. We need to be moving. We need to be physically in motion. And so it doesn't necessarily require you to have 45 minutes of intense exercise 4 times a week. It's just you need to be up and active physically. And exercise, however, is extremely important if you can actually add that to a regular active routine. But it needs to be enjoyable. I mean, exercise needs to be something that you do and look forward to. And we sort of use the word workout and that sort of thing that doesn't sound like fun necessarily to a lot of people. So we need to, think about it in a positive way, incorporate it into our lives in a positive way, make it a social exercise, go walking with a friend, on a routine basis, do the types of things you can do to just get moving.
Dr. Plopper, is there a prescription of how much? Often, I appreciate what you said, and that's very helpful. Is there an ideal or optimum space for how much exercise, time-wise?
Ideally, a person would have 3 to 5 fairly significant, I don't even want to use the term exercise, but fairly significant physical periods of activity 3 to 5 times a week, and for up to an hour. So if you did that, you would be doing what you need to do to keep your brain sharp relative to physical exercise. Now, you can improve that. I mean, you can do more than that, and you can certainly tone yourself better. You can provide more benefit in certain parts of your body, but just in terms of what's minimally necessary to keep your brain sharp, that's what's necessary.
I know you, Dr. Plopper, are wanting to share how sleep is becoming we're realizing sleep is becoming more and more important to our overall health. Share with us about, in terms of brain health, how sleep is significant.
Well, we've learned so much more about sleep in recent years, particularly that's when our brains cleanse themselves. That's when our brain cleanses itself of toxic substances which can accumulate in the brain. For example, amyloid. The amyloid is a toxic protein which accumulates in the brain all of us to some extent, but to a much greater extent in people who have serious dementias and particularly Alzheimer's disease. The brain, when we sleep, cleanses our brains of amyloid. And so it has this sort of function. It also helps us to consolidate memories. So when we sleep, our brains are at work to consolidate memories of the things that have happened during the day. So it's not like this is sort of a completely passive phenomenon. So it's extremely important to get sleep for these reasons. And it, it's on average, 7 or 8 hours of sleep is really what a person needs. Getting by with 5 or 6 hours really isn't enough. And so 7 or 8 hours. And if you're going to nap, napping no more than a half hour to 45 minutes during the day, because if you nap too much, that can interfere with sleep. But good sleep hygiene is really sort of the key. And that is going to bed at about the same time at night. Trying to get a little bit of exercise during the day, and preferably in the mornings if you can. It's more conducive to sleep to exercise in the morning than at night, but that's whenever you can get exercise, it's key to do it. The sleeping medicines are to be avoided if possible, but if you have to take a medicine, always check with your doctor in terms of whether you should stay on that medicine, because they can be quite habit forming and quite dangerous in older people in terms of sedatives and sleeping medicines. So to be avoided if possible, but if you have to take one, so be it, but just maybe not every night, so you don't develop tolerance to it, sort of depending on the type of medicines.
Dr. Popper, what about the other lifestyles aspects? Whether social is important, whether reading or being part of clubs. What else might be important in terms of the lifestyle that lends itself to brain health?
Well, keeping yourself intellectually stimulated is clearly important. Doing things that sort of challenge your brain. There's a huge cottage industry around brain teasers and ways to stimulate the brain through exercises. The only thing that's been shown is that there's a mild increase in processing speed for people who do those tests. So you will solve a problem a little faster as a consequence of doing those types of things, but that is the benefit. You're not going to have much in the way of other types of cognitive improvement, but keeping yourself active, trying to learn a new language, trying to play an instrument, challenging your brain to do new things is the best thing you can do to help it to age gracefully.
In social connections significant? I know when we talk about happiness and well-being, it plays a part there. I wonder about with brain health.
Social connections are vital to brain health in a variety of ways. The studies have shown that there's an improvement in stress hormones in people who regularly socialize versus people who are isolated. It's a stressful phenomenon to be isolated, and it's particularly in this period of time during the pandemic. It's become so much harder, particularly for some older people, to get connected with their families and friends. And so it's a real challenge. And I think we've done as good a job as we can possibly do in terms of through technology and remaining connected. And I think American society in particular has done a great job of trying to stay connected, but it's not enough. We do need to return to, when we can, safely, physical interactions with people, in-person interactions, social interactions, because there's so much to gain from that in a variety of ways.
You touched on a point there when you were talking about the significance of social. You talked about how it helps with stress management, but we didn't really talk about stress and how in lifestyle, and I wonder about stress impact on brain health.
Well, persons who lead a stressful life and don't figure out ways to cope with that stress. I mean, it's one thing to be stressed and live a stressful life, and many of us do. It's how we cope with that stress that matters. But there's good evidence that over time, through the actions of the hormone cortisol, which is elevated during stressful times, that chronic cortisol elevation can lead to tissue damage and disease states over time. So stress over time can directly correlate with the onset of disease if it's not coped with. So it's really how we view stress, whether we identify things as stressful, and figure out the best way to minimize that stress. So yes, absolutely. Doing our best to have a stress-free life as possible is important.
But Dr. Klopper, I must say I've taken meticulous notes on all the things that you shared because it's a wonderful template in terms of how to effectively support my brain health. I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about the research that you're doing and what you see kind of on the horizon in terms of Alzheimer's, dementia, and potential prescriptions.
Well, yes, we're doing a number of clinical trials at Sharp Healthcare in Alzheimer's disease in particular. And what we're looking for are ways to prevent people from developing Alzheimer's disease. We're trying to recruit people who may have a family history for Alzheimer's, but don't yet have symptoms or may have very mild symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. That's sort of the kind of individual we're looking for to participate with us. So they don't have to have symptoms. So what we're offering are memory screens where we can do some simple testing in person with you or remotely if you wish, and give you a good idea of how you're doing, and then discuss our trials with you. If you have any interest, we'd be happy to provide you more specific information, any of your listeners who might have that type of interest. But we're looking for medications which can halt the progression of Alzheimer's disease, cure Alzheimer's disease, or prevent it entirely. And we've shown some success. There's recently been a study which we did of a medication produced by Eli Lilly called donanemab. It was recently written up in the New York Times, which in its early trial did show that it delayed the onset of Alzheimer's disease. And we're doing a second large clinical trial with that medication, as well as others. And we have, sometimes these are what are called monoclonal antibodies, and they're antibodies which actually attach to amyloid in the brain and remove it from the brain. So these are not simple, benign studies. This is an infusion of this monoclonal antibody, typically on a monthly basis, and where you receive this infusion over the course of about an hour, and then stay in the study for a year or two. So these are not insignificant getting involved in these things is not an insignificant endeavor. And so we make sure that everybody fully understands what's involved. But what we provide is a complete workup. We do PET scans, which normally you can't get from your general physician, MRI scans, various types of imaging, looking for biomarkers for Alzheimer's to prove that a person likely has Alzheimer's. An important phenomenon we found is that the brain changes that happen in Alzheimer's disease can happen decades earlier than symptoms. So a person who may be destined to get Alzheimer's disease may show symptomatology if we really looked at their brains in their 40s, and they may not show symptoms until their 60s or 70s. And so these are sort of the hallmarks of the types of studies we're doing and the types of persons we're looking for.
And that's exciting. If we're recognizing it earlier, the opportunity to intervene much earlier and be effective in that intervention.
Yes.
Dr. Klopper, I really appreciate everything you've offered, your time, your expertise, and your insights. So thank you. Anything in closing that you want to share?
How about a phone number for anybody who might want a memory screen?
Excellent.
At 858-8350 is our research line, and you can call. We will call you back if we don't answer live, and schedule an appointment for you, either to have a memory screen remotely or in person, and we can discuss with you what this is all about
And
and give you some ideas.
one more time, that phone number, Michael?
It's 858-836-8350.
Wonderful. And then there's the question, we have that in the chat. And if someone wanted to volunteer, is that the same number they would make contact with?
Yes, they would call that number and we'll set up an appointment.
Fantastic. Dr. Plopper, thank you very much. Appreciate you being with us. And those that joined us for our conversation, thank you as well. Until the next time we're together, please be well. Thank you
Thank you,
very much.
Jonathan. Bye-bye.